Welcome to Season 5 of The Race. My name is Stéphane. I'm co-founder of Quincy and McKay Brothers. We build microwave networks, and we carry data over them and distribute them in different data centers. I would like to review with you a little bit of last year, what happened, and also spend time on what's next, what new technology could happen to us, and how we'll disturb some of the links. So just a summary of last year. The story of last year seems to be a story of expanding across the world. We delivered a few new places: Madrid, Marseille, Tokyo, Singapore. And the year coming, we'll see more of that, more expansion across the globe. So we'll go through Hong Kong, we'll do Milan, Zurich. We will finally deliver a good solution for the New Jersey Triangle, which is missing in our arsenal. But really, the race is not there. The race is not that of a coverage of the Earth. The race is in one place. It's CME to New Jersey. And then there are smaller races. So that's the race that we focus the most on. And I want to go back a bit on the history of that race. So there's a graph which shows the latency, and you can see it goes down all the time. It's going to reach almost zero. It will never be exactly at zero, but I think it will never stop. And if you look at the networks, we have our first iteration, which was the pinkish network. And I think we were very fortunate in that in 2010, when we started thinking about it, we designed it for the perfect network. But I don't think we really understood what perfect meant at that time, because we thought perfect was perfect Chicago to New Jersey, and we didn't understand at that time that perfect really meant perfect from CME to NY2 and perfect from CME to Carteret independently and to Marwa independently. So we designed a network which, as you can see in pink, was decent, was not like some of the competitor networks that weren't fixable. So we could improve, remove some wiggliness, but it was not perfect. And lo and behold, what we've done so far is essentially remove all the wiggliness, and we've gone to being straight, but not on the geodesic yet. And at the end of, at the very beginning of last year, we were faced with, okay, we have done all that we could without rebuilding everything. What do we do next? And it's always a question of the revenue coming in. You pour back in everything in the network, and when do you stop? When do you accumulate cash a little bit to wait for the next turn, see what's going on? And we were very hesitant. And the other thing that happened to us last year is we welcomed the investment of IMC and Tower, and that helped us decide to go all in, essentially. And when they did that, we decided to continue the race and really not try to accumulate any cash. They provided that cash infusion. We were happy with it, and we decided to go all in. So I will share with you the next iteration of our network. And usually we don't share that. But now, it's going to be on the geodesic, so there's nothing to hide. It's going to be exactly on the path that you could draw with Google if you go from one data center to another one. And our current path is 1 mile off from the geodesic. Our next one is going to be, presumably if you succeed, 0.15 mile from the geodesic. And I hope we don't have to redo it, Well, we might. So suppose NY2 moves by a few kilometers north. Maybe we have to redo it. That's crazy. So this slide here is a slide that I didn't do. It's a slide that Bob used for an internal presentation. And there's a white place here, and I decided to clean up the slide a little bit because it was internal comments. And then I thought better of it because I wanted to share with you what those internal comments were. And that's it. That's the way we think about it. And that's what, what we share, and that's what the race is. It just never ends. So I went back and looked at the YouTube little clip of that, and it's gripping. And that's where we live. So, and the picture there is, so far we had not built any tower. And to be absolutely perfect, now we have to build towers. So it's a very new area for us. Now, I'd like to explore something different. I'd like to explore a new technology because as we expand across more paths and go from, say, CME to Bombay or CME to Singapore, then the perfect microwave path are not available. So what's next? What's the winning technology? And I don't know what the winning technology is, but the best we can do is try and simulate some of the possibilities. So let's look at the satellites. So satellites are actually unbelievably complicated. We come from a technology where you have 2 points, you draw a line on Google Map, you construct towers, and you got the ultimate product. And of course, you have to buy the best radios from the best vendors, but the best vendors improve all the time. So you get there. For satellites, there are so many ways to do satellites. And I just took many pictures. They're just pretty pictures. And what we've done is we've done some simulation of what the latencies could be produced between any 2 points. And there are many variables that come into the equation. Of course, the full construct of the orbits, the height of the satellites, the way they communicate between each other, and the way they communicate with the ground. So let's have a little look at that. First, simple math. If you have a satellite somewhere and giving a height, it will have a coverage area which scales with a fairly simple equation, which I can show you here. Here I've plotted the coverage area as a function of height. So this is a range which is not the most interesting range. It goes out to the 36,000 kilometer range where you have geostationary satellites, but most of the interest is on the left of that graph. And you can see that with even modest heights, you get to really big coverage areas. So you don't need a ton of satellites. Let's zoom in the left part of the graph. So here I've plotted the heights between 0 and 2,000 kilometers and some of the constellations that have been discussed. And most of them are just projects. I have no idea which one will actually come out and be successful. But you can see that they really focus on that sweet spot between 400 kilometers and 1,500 kilometers. And you can see that the coverage area is very wide. Let's then you think, okay, but they're high up in the air, so certainly they will add too much latency because I got to go up and then I got to go down. But that's not really true. If you look at the extra distance that you have to go through by going through a satellite, it's actually not that much. And here I've plotted something different, which is very simple, crude assumptions, but it's just orders of magnitude, is if you go through this idealist satellite, which goes to grazing angle on both sides and has maximum coverage area, then if you do 4,000 kilometers, you only add half a millisecond. And that's really nothing if you cross an ocean and your competition is a fiber cable. So satellites will definitely win sometimes. So now, how many times? And of course, in this case, the satellite I'm talking about is one satellite which is sitting right there, say in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and not moving, and seeing London and New York on either side, and communicating. But that doesn't happen. To be geostationary, satellites have to be at 36,000 kilometers. So the real satellites, they zoom really quickly, and the problem that you have to solve is much more difficult than this simple equation. So what do we do? Well, there isn't much more than trying to simulate. And I've drawn a few interesting links on the map, and I will walk you through the simulation of some of those links. So first, our assumptions. So we've taken what we understand from a few of the published constellations, LeoSat, SpaceX, Iridium Next. For Iridium Next, we had an assumption of grazing angle for the communication satellite to Earth. So it's something where I'm advantaging the results of Iridium Next. None of that should be taken face value. None of that is true data. It's just a guide to the eye. And then you have to understand, to simulate how the satellites are going to communicate between each other. And you can go to the internet and download pretty pictures or studies, and you can see, for instance, LeoSat, they are looking to communicate along the north-south axis, and also at a angle between two different slices, if you will. So that's every satellite has 4 neighbors. And that's how you communicate. So if you want to go from one point to another point, you have to walk some kind of lattice, and you have to find the minimal path. That's how you do it. So what we do is we spin the Earth, stop it at some point, look at the constellation, and go from London to Tokyo. We go up to the best satellite, then walk the lattice, and go down to the next destination, which is Tokyo, and record what that path length is. That's what the simulation is. And you do many, many simulations, and you have an idea of what the distribution of latencies can be between any 2 points on Earth. Given those very crude assumptions, I have to tell you that again. So that's a slightly simplified version to make it clear exactly what we assume in terms of a connectivity matrix. Now, let's simulate, and I want to go from London to Tokyo. So I've spun the Earth, and sometimes I find a pretty good path. And that's one example of it. So to go from London, it's not straight. It's not as good as what we could do if we were to build all through Russia, but it's pretty good. So that's a low latency path. And then you spin the Earth again, and you try and solve the minimum path between London and Tokyo, and you find paths which are not as good, and some of them just are not competitive. So you look, and when you assemble all those results, then you have a distribution. And that distribution you can see on a graph here, and of course I've started with London to Frankfurt because it's one of our paths, and we're not threatened by satellites there, nor are we threatened by satellites Chicago to New Jersey. Satellites have way too much overhead for that. But that's just to show you one thing is here you have to read latency on the vertical axis and percent of the time where the path is a latency less than. So it's a cumulative distribution. So if you look at a latency of on the top blue line, a latency of 20 and a bit. You can see that 20% of the time, it's better than 20. I hope it's better than 20 millisecond. And you see another thing. In the constellations that we've simulated, there are real constellations or really proposed constellations like Iridium NEXT and LeoSat. And there are other things which are fake McKay constellations. So it's thought experiments. And one thing that you learn from this simple thought experiment, we do a 10 by 10 matrix and just try it and do either a polar orbit or an angle of 45 degrees. And we have various assumptions for how we communicate to ground. But the one thing you learn is that orbital science is a science. So if you look at the McKay constellations, you can see that some fraction of the time, they just don't connect, even London to Frankfurt. So the thing that's going up straight means that sometimes our great constellations where we use 100 satellites don't even connect London and Frankfurt. That's pretty bad. Let me look at a slightly different and more topical path. So Aurora to Sao Paulo. There's cables being, I think maybe already live. And these cables will have competition. Aurora to Sao Paulo is a typical one where the cables, I don't know where they land. I think it's in the 100 something. And you can see that both Iridium NEXT and LeoSat, if they are actually built, Iridium NEXT I think is launching this year and completing next year, so they're presumably going to be up, but we have no idea if they have the communication assumptions built in that we assumed. So we don't really know if they're going to deliver that. LeoSat, if they do deliver, on the other hand, will probably have something not too far from what we predict, because that's what they are trying to do. So you can see that Aurora to Sao Paulo, for instance, is something where cable is going to get a run for its money. Now, London to Tokyo, the other thing, like the ugly graph with the super bizarre path. So that's another one. So that's a slightly different thing because it really depends where the economics is. Because you could build all across Russia. Terrestrial microwave can win. It's a little bit difficult. It's long. It's long. Like, it takes us time to just do Chicago to New Jersey well. So going across all of Russia would be extremely challenging. But it can be done. So I don't know where the race ends on that one. And presumably, satellites will take over for a while. I think the best latency Tokyo to London is somewhat between 140 and 150. So you can see that this is really going to beat the best cables. So London to Secaucus, that's another very interesting one, because that's the core Hibernia GTT fiber. And the latency is around, the shade under 50. And you can see that's another thing where this is going to be on the edge. This is going to be where fiber is going to win sometimes, and satellites sometimes, depending on exactly what the assumptions are. So that's a really interesting path. That's a path where, and that's by the way, a horrendous news for HFT firms, because it means you might have to buy from multiple vendors, and sometimes one's going to be fast and sometimes it's going to be the other. So that's the worst thing for you. I'm sorry. I'd love to have the ultimate solution. So that's a really interesting situation. And not only it's likely that the fiber is going to be winning sometimes, maybe. A satellite constellation is going to be winning some other times. And it could be a third satellite constellation winning other times. So that's really ugly. Let's look at another one. So Aurora to Singapore. Aurora to Singapore, there's no way that you can build microwave terrestrial directly. You know, I guess you could do illusions. There are funny things that you can think about, but really, it's going to be hard to beat the satellites. So that's another path where, you know, today, Aurora to Singapore, you think of it as you got to go from Aurora to Tokyo and then from Tokyo to Singapore. That changes. All those paths are coming, and they're not stopping in places. They're going direct from A to B. So that's very different. The value of, say, CME to New Jersey is because there's trading in CME in New Jersey, but it's also because there's trading in Frankfurt. And if you want to go from the CME to Frankfurt, you want to go CME, New Jersey, London, London, Frankfurt. So you have to assemble pieces. Now, with satellites, it's going to be very different. So the economics of our industry, the low latency providers of connectivity, is going to change a lot. I have a little special graph for SpaceX, because SpaceX has so many satellites that it's hard for us to simulate too many things. You know, it's just a little bit more difficult. SpaceX would win any time if they designed it to win. You know, I have no idea what they want to do. I have no idea if they will launch that constellation. But if they were to really design it to win, there are so many satellites, it's going to be almost straight all the time. And if they have enough connectivity between any neighbors, if they have connectivity between any satellite and 10 neighbors, they're guaranteed to win. Over the others, you know, there could be a next SpaceX. Of course, there will be. Now, if I go back to a little comparisons, that was really to underline on the number that is the percentage of the time that is connected any two cities, and that's Aurora to Singapore, that McKay has not learned to design orbits very well yet. You know, and that should be of no surprise to you. We're not in that business. But we're trying to understand what's coming, because that's definitely coming our way. With that, I'd like to leave you with a simple conclusion. Long links are going to be, you know, maybe not dominated all the time by satellites, but satellites will definitely overtake fiber on many of the long links. Which constellations, I don't know. When exactly, I don't know. But it's really interesting, and that is for season 6. With that, I open it to questions.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? I got one up here. Matt, let me bring you the mic.
Thanks, Stéphane. That was a great presentation, as usual. You said something early in the presentation that none of your figures assumed any satellite radio latency. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and that stood through all the slides.
Yes.
Okay.
And the thing is, when we go back to a tower, we change the radio, and it goes down from 1 mic to 0.1 mic, the
Sure.
repeater latency.
Sure.
If you want to do that in a satellite, it's kind of more difficult. So
Yeah,
you'll
or
go
they have
up
to be
with
low
some
latency
assumptions.
capable to begin with. I mean, I have no idea what satellite radio latency is right now, but any sense of that?
I don't know. My guess is that this is not an area of focus. They're
Sure.
using, they're not using the latest networking equipment.
Sure,
They,
sure.
they want things that never break,
Sure.
because the cost of repairing the thing is kind of high. And I would assume more the 100 microsecond range than the few hundred nanosecond range.
One more question. Will we see McKay Galactic anytime soon?
Season 6.
Take that. Bruce Glover with the Associated Press. Hi, Stéphane. How are you? You mentioned earlier something about the Terminator. Who or what is that?
That's a very good question. You want to know who the Terminator is? It's hard for me to disclose. So, no, I think, truth be told, I think the Terminator is an allegory for the system. It's the race we're in. It's not one firm. It's just us all. We're the Terminators. Like, there's nothing that stops us, and there's no common sense to be taught into us. We're the Terminators.
Thank you.
Any others? Right here.
Hi, Stéphane. Great presentation, again, as usual. You mentioned again earlier in the presentation about balloons, but most of the presentation was about satellites. Is there anything realistic happening with balloons in the future? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I can definitely see satellites coming for sure. Balloons, I doubt that they'll be all over the world. There's no reason to put balloons over the Atlantic. People don't do that ultimately for HFT. Well, some people might, but not yet. So you have to find some reason to have balloons across the Pacific, and it's hard to find.
I got a couple more. Yeah, sorry. There you go. Let's go here first.
Just to follow up on balloons, there's a lot of commercial flights over the Atlantic. Are there any possibilities in that space?
So putting things on planes, is that what you're saying? I'm sure there is. I think the thing is, the aviation industry, to design a plane or to do any change to a plane, it takes years. So I think the barrier to delivering something in the commercial aviation industry is just changing the seat, I think, takes at least 10 years.
What about repurposing old platforms? They go for scrap now, like $2 million each. You could repurpose old platforms and place them along the Atlantic Ocean.
No, yes. No, there are tons of great ideas. Alex, who is one of the, maybe the first guy to deliver a network between CME and Chicago and New Jersey, he went quiet. And I think the reason he went quiet is that because he was working on something crazy. So I still have the remote hope that he's going to emerge one day and have either platforms or I don't know, buoys or something. No, there are definitely other technologies. But the thing is, satellites, they're coming.
So what about drones? Is that there are drones, solar-powered drones, that can be up in the air for a year, and it seems like they could be in a low, that's better than a low Earth orbit because you wouldn't have the vertical and you could have the point-to-point connectivity.
So I think for drones, it's going to be just a cost equation. Today, I don't think the cost equation or the technology is just there, but it may get there. And when they are there, if they're cheap enough, they'll beat satellites. So I see satellites taking over, and then, of course, satellites won't win forever.
Time for maybe one more. Got one more over here, and then we're out of time.
Enjoyed the presentation as always, Stéphane. One path I don't recall you mentioning was, say, the Go West path from Aurora or New York to get to Tokyo. There's been some public speculation about licenses acquired in that direction. Could you comment on the...
licenses, or meaning trying to compete from CME to Seattle, or
Yes,
launching?
yes, and then cable under the water, of course, fiber.
So we try and understand and look at that. We don't see any immediate threat to those folks. From what we see, they seem to be in a good position for a little bit of time. But when the satellites are there, that won't be the fastest path anymore.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I believe we're out of time, but if you have any further questions, I'm sure Steph will be around. So thank you very much.
Thank you.